Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. My name is Ken Edwards from the Midwest Coalition of Labor. Sitting next to me is Ed Maher from the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Ken. Well said. Good to see you.
It's a lot of words.
It's a long one
For early in the morning.
Yeah, how about it?
Yeah. Hey, we're continuing this week with our theme of, obviously advancing workers' rights, but real live ways to make it happen. We're really psyched to have a guest today. His name is Dale Pierson. He is an extremely smart, popular, progressive, push-the-envelope lawyer that works for Local 150. I've worked with him for a really, really long time. Respect the hell out of him. Just a super cool guy. And also has a bunch of good stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And one of these guys who throughout his career has looked for opportunities to help workers that are struggling, against employers who have the deck stacked against them and things like that. So I think in the vein of conversation we were having last week about finding creative solutions to even the playing field between small groups of workers without a lot of resources and companies that are wealthy and well equipped, Dale is going to have some interesting thoughts. And I think having attorneys in who are able to talk about this stuff in just very plain language and make it easy to understand is important. So along with Dale, I think next week we're going to have Travis.
Yeah. Travis Ketterman, also does some work for Local 150's Fund, but primarily with the Carpenters, actually. So,
Right.
He's going to continue the conversation. Travis is also one of the people that founded the MCL idea with me and helped me get this off the ground. So we're psyched to have him as well. And, look, for the folks that are listening that are thinking about joining unions or have their nascent unions or the Starbucks workers or whatever, we're trying to give you guys like direct, concrete advice as to what to do and how to do it. And we're also talking to established unions in the labor movement in general as to like, hey, everybody, like we talked about last week, do better. Like let's get off our ass and let's pass some legislation, right? We got a friendly, we got a friendly situation here in Illinois at the moment, right?
Right, absolutely. And the National Labor Relations Board is primed to help workers.
Yeah, they got a little bit of money, right?
For sure, they did, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the show too. Some of the things that they're looking to change to just make it a little bit easier, a little bit less onerous for workers to get to that first contract.
Yeah, which by the way, the laws are stacked. I mean, stacked against workers.
Right.
Period. The end. It is what it is. Everybody's like, oh, what do you need unions for? You got all these great laws to protect you. No, you don't.
Right. I mean, we're talking about helping them get organizers and helping them get lawyers, and I mean, it's a few steps down the road until they can get lobbyists.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's where those changes have been made over the years.
I think that's right. And also, just in a quick change, we got our rankings recently for
the Nielsen ratings for radio.
Yeah,
that's right.
What's it called? Ranker?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. I don't know. How do we get one of those boxes?
I don't know, but we're going to have to do it because right now
we're number 2.
We are the number 2 AM radio show on Sunday mornings.
Between 8 and 9.
But once we get one of those boxes, we're going to make it to number 1.
I am not.
You hear that, WBBM?
Yeah.
We're coming for you.
We're coming for you. I'm not above cheating, by the way, to achieve my goals.
I know that. Everybody knows that.
And by the way, that snippet will be used against me when I run for office.
For sure. Ken Edwards.
Not above cheating to achieve his goals. It is what it is. Whatever. So, listen.
Well, let's get Dale in here.
All right, let's get Dale in here. You're listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. Welcome back to WGN 720, the Workers' Mic. I'm Ken. This is Ed. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I mean, over the commercial break, not much has happened, but
no,
it's still going pretty good, Ken.
As we talked about earlier at the top of the show, we are honored, really honored to have with us today Dale Pierson. Dale is the General Counsel for the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. Welcome, Dale.
So glad to have you, Dale. A friend and
Ed.
a mentor, and I think a lot of you.
Yeah.
Likewise, Ed.
Oh, ouch. and I've known Dale longer than Ed.
Yeah, well, it shows. It really shows.
So just super quick background. Dale has been the longtime, year 2000 maybe? 2001. You guys came on
02.
staff?
02. We had our 20th anniversary last year.
Oh, cool. So 20 years of being on staff at Local 150. And Dale used to work for a law firm for how many years? For a long time?
Yes. Actually, I started to work for the firm and for 150 at the same time, which was after Bill Dugan got elected in 1986.
Got it. How long have you been a lawyer?
43 years.
Jesus.
Seen a few things.
And you still have your license?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Hanging on. Actually, I'll take that back. 41 years.
41 years.
Excuse me.
Okay, fair enough. That's awesome. So, you know, and I'm going to digress for a quick second. This is something that I think that we're going to talk about this year. You know, this is the year of the workers we talked about last time, but we're asking unions to do better. One of the things I think that was unique as to what Local 150 did was it brought its legal staff, it brought lawyers on staff, right?
Yes.
And I was in one of those positions, obviously. I literally took the place of the first lawyer that they had ever hired simply to even up the playing field because the employers in my world was public sector. They had tax dollars, so they could never – you couldn't shut off the municipality's money.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And these employers also had pretty deep pockets. And so what Local 150 was doing was paying Dale's former firm a decent amount of money, and the decision was made to bring Dale and company on staff, paying them a salary, and thereby telling the contractors, like, you're not going to outspend us now because we have on-staff attorneys.
I think that was a big motivator. When it first came around that the officers of the union approached me to create the legal department, I said, I don't think you're going to save as much money as you think you're going to save, and I don't think you're going to get better service. And I was wrong on both
Well, they
counts.
probably promptly tripled your workload, I'm sure.
Well, there's that, but the access, the fact that we were like basically across the parking lot, down the hall, that was one of the things that they enjoyed the most. And when Bill Dugan retired, he said it was one of the best decisions he ever made to bring us in-house. So I was pretty complimented at that. And after the first year on the other score, they saved about $1 million.
That's amazing.
It was truly amazing. I mean, they obviously are smart guys and know what they're doing. So.
But have you seen, Dale, this as a trend in other unions? Because I've certainly, in my travels now with the MCL, I'm watching unions bring on young attorneys on staff.
I have seen more of it happening, and there's sort of a network developing. Now, to have a staff as big as ours, I think, is unusual still.
Sure.
But I think a lot of unions are realizing that to have one or two people where when they have an immediate go-to question, it's more convenient. Plus, it helps to have someone, again, exclusive access, but also you learn that client. We've only got one client. You learn their problems so much more quickly, and you've usually solved one problem. We did this 2 years ago to fix that, so let's do this now.
So you have the institutional knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. So if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. We're talking to Dale Pierson, General Counsel for the Operating Engineers Local 150. We discussed, Dale, last week some concepts that we think that labor should push in the year 2023. So Ed and I were talking about the fact that 2022 saw a giant uptick in union elections, right, Ed? What was it, like
Yeah, it was a 50% increase over 2021 in elections that were successful, but now 2023 leaves a lot of those groups to negotiate their first contract, and they're finding out that they are ill-equipped in many cases to stand up to a Starbucks of the world or an Amazon that has an army of seasoned lawyers. So, we're looking for solutions and talking about solutions for these groups of workers that may not have the same resources to try to even the playing field.
Well, I'll throw another stat at you, Ed and Ken. Through half of 2022, the union win rate was 75% in labor board elections, which is, it's often been in the 60, 65 range. But to be winning 75% is, really, really good. Unfortunately, the number of first contracts is much less.
Yeah, like zero.
Well, the numbers I came up with in anticipation of today was that in the first year, only 36% of the victories result in a first contract.
Wow.
And then there's some stats. This is a little older, but they say that only 56% ever get a first contract.
Right, because the employers play the old game of delay, wait, litigate, delay, wait,
Right.
litigate, replace people, fire people, union bust, close down. I mean,
Right.
there's just this plethora of games that the employers play. And, Starbucks isn't reinventing the wheel here. They're
Right.
just following the same old playbook.
Right.
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So Ed and I were talking about, a couple of things. And one is the fact that you're listening to a lot of labor folks and podcasts and people bemoan various things, but nobody's ever coming up and saying, hey, let's, instead of complaining, let's actually do something.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is the do something part. And so we talked about interest arbitration last week. And Dale, you're familiar with interest arb.
Yes.
Okay. In 2 seconds, what is it?
When the parties, employer, management, and labor, the union that represents the employees, cannot themselves come to an agreement, there are provisions often in state law or elsewhere that will allow you to present the contract issues to a neutral arbitrator. And then either by agreement or by statute, as it is in Illinois, the arbitrator can come to a conclusion and basically impose a contract on those parties.
Perfect. And that's exactly what we talked about. And that takes away one party's incentive to surface bargain or not bargain in good faith or delay the process or litigate, et cetera, because there are time frames in this. Correct?
Right. And that's exactly right. And I'll give you the one stat that I just came up with this morning.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, where they have mandatory interest arbitration in the private sector, unlike here in the United States,
Yeah.
92% of first contracts get signed.
Wow.
92.
And that's compared to 30-something% in the United
Right,
States.
that's right. I mean, 92. So, and I think it's
works.
primarily because of what you just said, Ken. It's a disincentive not to reach agreement on your own.
Right. So let's drill down on that, okay? So, and by the way, for the listeners out there, Google interest arbitration. You can learn all about it. It's much like a salary arbitration for a baseball player.
Right.
Right.
Usually you hear about arbitration with baseball players.
That's right. And I think we're going to interview an arbitrator at some point as well. But let me ask you this, Dale. Right now, you said earlier that Illinois has it in one of its statutes, and that is the public sector statute, right?
Correct.
Police and fire in the state of Illinois are not allowed to strike. And in exchange for that, they agreed to interest arbitration.
That's right.
Okay. Recently, over the past, 10 years or so, give or take, they changed that statute as well. They modified it to allow non-police and fire, i.e., teachers, public works, whatever it is, to also engage in interest arbitration if you have a first contract of a group of 35 or less. Now, I did it for a long time. The threat of that arbitration was actually more powerful than actually going to the arbitration.
How many did you actually have?
I had none. I didn't.
Yeah.
Not a single one, because
Right.
I would say, great, you don't want to agree, we're going to go to arbitration, and lo and behold, we'd meet in the middle.
Yeah, rather than them wanting to take their chances with an arbitrator and losing their position completely.
That's exactly right.
mm-hmm.
So my question to you, Dale, is I have a couple of questions, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. Because, like Ed said, you've been doing this a long time, and Dale's one of those people, by the way, that pushes the envelope.
Absolutely.
And Dale came up with the quote that I use all the time that I've literally taken to heart. I'm digressing again for a second, which is make them make us stop.
Absolutely.
And I've always found that quote to be really helpful because
It's a mindset.
yeah, and when I'm out on a limb or doing something stupid, I go, first of all, hey, Dale, I think I broke the law 16 times. Don't worry, Ken. What are they going to do, put you in labor board jail? Dale would literally say stuff like, Dale would tell me, Ken, wrap yourself in the flag. Give me all this, kind of, boost me up, and was a big proponent of the things that we were doing
Testing boundaries.
early on, testing boundaries. So I appreciate that, Dale. I've always meant to tell you that. But let me ask you this. What do you think about if that law was passed in Illinois for arbitration for first contracts in the private sector, would that be preempted by federal labor law?
That's a tough question to answer, because if I say I believe it's likely to be preempted. Then somebody's going to use this against me when we try to come up with a statute that says you have to use this in the private sector.
So the answer is no.
Well, the answer is absolutely no.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay.
And of course, as lawyers, as Sweeney's always kidding me about, it's like one of those two hands things, right? The lawyers have two hands. Yeah, the lawyers have two hands. On the one hand is this, on the other hand is that. So under federal labor law, since 1959 at least, a Supreme Court decision then said that if a state regulation is actually, or if the conduct that the state wants to regulate is actually or arguably protected or prohibited by the National Labor Relations Act, then it falls within the exclusive primary jurisdiction of the National Labor Relations Board. So preemption basically comes from the fact that Congress has the authority to regulate interstate commerce. That's where the labor laws come from. So the goal was to get the states out of the regulation of labor unions.
Sure.
And for the most part, it's been successful. But the preemption doctrines are riddled with exceptions. I mean, there's all kinds of exceptions.
Right to work.
Right to work laws
is one of the few statutory exceptions.
Right.
But early on, the courts were saying, well, look, states always have an interest in protecting their populations from violence. So if there was strike violence, the cops are going to come in and arrest you, and that's not going to be preempted by the labor board.
Got it.
State trespass laws, same thing. Defamation is another area where, at first, when a company would sue the union for defamation, they'd file unfair labor practice charges. They argued it was preemption. In a Supreme Court case in the 1960s, just 2 years after the famous New York Times v. Sullivan actual malice decision, they applied that rule to defamation cases. They let defamation cases go in state court, but they changed the standard to have a national standard of actual malice, knowledge of falsity, or reckless disregard for the truth.
Bill Johnson's?
No, this one was Lynn v. Plant Guard Workers.
Plant Guard Workers, yeah. Okay. So you're saying that the answer is, it certainly could be an exemption to the preemption rule, right? And given, once again, in my humble opinion, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the Biden administration, who, by the way, has been extremely labor-friendly and given us a ton of work. I'm certainly not knocking them. But they had no problem imposing a contract on the rail workers.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And, so it wasn't even they imposed arbitration. They just imposed a contract.
Right.
Right? As opposed to saying, hey, you guys go to interest arbitration, and whatever the arbitrator comes up with, that's what you're going to live with. They just imposed the contract.
Right.
So you would think that an interest arbitration would be sort of a step backwards a little bit to say, here's an easier way to solve this.
Right.
So, second question, do you think that this could be done by executive order? In other words, could the president say, based on interstate commerce, that there's an interest in labor stability, labor peace, and, too often 36% of contracts, 36% of union jobs wind up in first contracts, but 70 some odd don't. And there's an interest in, stability, blah, blah, blah. Could that happen by executive order?
I think that would be one avenue to attempt, and I think that there is some legal basis to support it. Now, of course, in the situation of the railroads, it's a separate statute, right? The Railway Labor Act.
Yes.
And in a previous life, when I first started practicing, I did do some Railway Labor Act work. And
when the trains ran on coal?
Well, it wasn't quite that long ago.
The
Anyway.
push cart where the guy's pushing it up and down.
Yeah. In a silent movie, kind of grainy. Yeah. No, that was me, right? No. So
Piano soundtrack.
The president has the authority under that statute to do what he did. So there's that aspect of it, which is actually pretty important.
Yeah.
But when you raised this with me, I began to try to think about how would you go about doing it. I mean, first of all, arbitration is the national labor policy. I mean, the National Labor Relations Act, after Taft-Hartley, one of the only good things that Taft-Hartley did was add to the labor laws that governed federal or that governed private sector labor relations, was that arbitration is part of the national labor policy. So in addition to that, it created the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, FMCS,
yes.
and created all these sort of standards and rules whereby you would promote mediation. Now, one of the things that statute did was include notice requirements so that when a contract is close to expiration, when you're 60 days out, no less than 60 days, you're bound to try to you notify the company, of course, that you're going to negotiate a new agreement, but you have to tell the FMCS.
Yes, so they can monitor it.
Right.
Right.
And you have to tell any state mediation agency. So the statute actually created a role for states to play in private sector
I love it.
negotiations.
So there's a path here.
I think so.
So listen, this is really interesting, and quite frankly, I think it warrants some more discussion.
Yeah.
So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break right here, and then we're going to come back. And
You can stick around for a few minutes, Dale.
I'm happy to.
Thank you. We appreciate it. You're listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. Welcome back, everyone, to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. I'm Ken. This is Ed and Dale. We're here with Dale Pierson. If you're just tuning in, Dale Pierson, General Counsel for Local 150, the operating engineers. We're talking about interest arbitration, and how to get to first contracts. Dale, thanks for sticking around. We appreciate it. We were going to do one segment, but I just think that this is interesting and more. There's a little bit more to add here.
We've got to tap into this wealth of knowledge while we have it.
We don't have smart people in this room very often. That's not true. Every single one of our guests is smart. Yeah. But so, Dale, let's keep going. Right? We were talking about ways to get this done. Give us a couple examples of ways you think that we can get arbitration for first contracts to be the law of the land.
Well, as we were saying before the break, I think because the federal law does create a role for state mediation agencies, that might be the window that we try to crawl through.
Sure.
There's a downside there because there are specific references in the statute to not being able to impose provisions of an agreement. But I think the idea, and you alluded to this earlier, Ken, by the way, I think you guys are a couple of the smartest people I know. And I very much appreciate your comments earlier, Ken.
Sure.
Especially the let's push the edge of the envelope type stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm all for that, and I think this is an area where you could do it. You justify it first by the fact that federal law does allow for a state role, and because the national labor policy is to promote arbitration of labor disputes.
Yeah.
But you said earlier, Ken, it's all about labor speech, labor stability, labor peace,
That's correct.
labor stability.
Right.
I mean, those are very, very important goals. The fact that you lost so much productivity was one of the worker productivity was one of the basic reasons that the NLRA was passed in the first place.
Right.
So I think you see that still. You don't want people on the streets. You don't want, like Local 150 did last summer, went through a 7-week strike. Basically 400, 450, 500 guys hit the bricks, but thousands of people were out of work because the construction industry kind of grinds to a halt when they can't get limestone.
Yeah.
Right? So, there's a lot of reasons why promoting mediation, is both in the federal and in the state interest. And I think that the political climate in Illinois is such that obviously Local 150 has been on a roll since passing the Workers' Rights Amendment.
Knock on wood.
Yeah. And why not keep going?
The Illinois labor movement is strong right now. We're in a position of strength like we've never seen.
I think that's exactly right. And I think politicians know that. Mm-hmm. I think most of them agree with us, believe in the value of unions in promoting the rights of workers and creating.
And like we've talked about here, sorry to cut you off, but unions have a 70+% approval rating right now. If the unions, and I'm talking to you, AFL-CIO, National AFL-CIO, I'm talking directly to you right now, take some of that money and try and pass a bill, right? The next way, Dale, would be federally, right? Right. Create an actual statute, because this was, by the way, on the table in something called the PRO Act, which of course never passed, because God forbid they should actually pass anything directly related to workers' rights. But try and pass this one little piece of the PRO Act, which is arbitration for first contracts. Pretty simple, right? Just, I hate to say it, if you just pass that law, well, then that's the end of the discussion, right? A federal law, right?
Right.
And I think that I don't see how that could not be bipartisan.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, but federal labor policy in the NLRA was never just to permit collective bargaining. It was always to promote collective bargaining.
That's right. The national labor policy is to promote collective bargaining as a way of achieving labor peace and labor stability. It's also, if you look at the findings and conclusions of Congress, they're in the middle of the Great Depression. It's all about Keynesian economics. They want people to have the ability to buy stuff.
Yeah.
Purchasing power is a key piece of that puzzle. And people deny it today, but it's still true. What's the stat? 70% of the U.S. economy is based on consumer spending.
Right.
I mean, if people don't have not just living wages, so they can buy food. If they can't buy flat screens and cars and take vacations now and then, most of the economy grinds to a halt.
Right.
So that's a really good point, right? So getting a first contract would provide, quite frankly, better wages for workers. It's just that simple.
Yep.
Contracts provide better wages. I don't care what you say, good, bad, or indifferent about unions. A union contract is going to pay you more than you working as an employee at will with no contract.
Absolutely.
And then where do those folks take their money? They take their money to the mom and pop store down the block and buy something. They take it to the grocery store and buy something. They take it to dinner, and support local businesses.
Middle class people are not socking their money away in Cayman Island bank accounts or buying back stock. They're spending money fixing their cars, buying new furniture.
Yeah, buying snowmobiles and motorcycles, and
Buying coffee at Intelligentsia.
Right, exactly.
and F-150s. Go to a union meeting and you'll see about $1 trillion worth of trucks in the parking lot.
With trailer hitches.
Well earned.
Right?
With
And
trailer hitches
to
for their
your
boats.
boat to your lake. Right,
to your
exactly.
lake house.
That's the American dream, baby.
Absolutely.
And God bless them. So
Absolutely.
I think that there's an absolute justification for passing this, because it will. I think if somebody smarter out there than me, and I'm talking to you, Alepi, and some of those groups, would to do a study that says what would the economic result of having arbitration for first contracts be in the United States? It's got to be an upward, trend, right?
I think, and I've got that in my notes too. This is the great minds think alike part of it. We have ILEPI, the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, and they're always looking for cool studies like that.
Yeah.
There's two here. One would be to do a study on interest arbitration in the public sector in Illinois to see what those numbers are comparatively, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, what is the value of a first contract to the working people of the state and of the country?
Right.
I mean, we'll focus on the state, maybe Illinois, Indiana, but I got to, that those numbers were going to be a dramatic indication of what we're talking about, how valuable, how important it is to working people.
So when you get back to the office today, you will demand that study be.
I'm going to make a suggestion, and I've been invited to go directly to the ILEPI folks, and I'll mention it to Mark. But they're always looking for these sorts of things, and it wasn't long ago. I think it was just a month ago that Mark said, throw some ideas our way. So I think this.
Well, now that the idea is out there, let's put it this way: that the right wing is frantically at the moment, studying why this thing should go south and how bad it will be, and how it'll raise property taxes, and take your guns away.
Yeah, or encourage predators and God knows what.
That's right.
The most off the wall, outrageous, scary things.
Child molesters.
Yeah, there's going to be clouds of toxic gas.
Arbitration will destroy America. Socialism.
Bands of rabid dogs roaming through the city.
So, Dale, you are a Renaissance man because I know we've had millions of conversations about books and movies and TV, and I know Ed loves to talk to you about that.
Absolutely.
Ed, you got a question for Dale?
Yeah, I mean, Dale's got a famously, great taste in music, and so I was just curious, Dale. Good question I love to ask people is if you could see any band, living or dead. I mean, living obviously, but if you could see any band, living or dead, who would it be?
I'd like to go back to see the Grateful Dead in the 1970s and 80s.
Really?
Now, how many times did you see the Grateful Dead?
I'm not like many of these folks who follow them around and have seen them 200 times. I can only count up about maybe 20 times.
Wow.
In my life.
Only 20?
Only 20 times.
But clearly the band I've seen the most often. And I've got the pictures in my office of the very first concert I saw, which was 50 years ago, last summer.
Wow.
It was 1972 that I saw them at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. And I tell people, who are familiar with the Grateful Dead that this is a very unusual picture because Jerry Garcia has no beard. He almost always had a beard, and he's relatively thin.
Wow.
So he's always kind of a husky
Sure.
fellow, too. So, that's my band.
Didn't you have Kiss come play at your university?
Indeed. And when I was at Northern Illinois University in the early 70s, we had something called Springfest.
Sure.
Where, the student government would fund various activities just as kind of spring is finally here sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so the concert committee at NIU identified a band called the New York Dolls.
Absolutely.
And had actually contracted with the Dolls to come to NIU to be in the ballroom.
Right.
Which was only about a 1,000-seat venue, and sometimes we wouldn't even put seats in it. It would just be you're standing there, and the stage is only about like this tall, like as tall as this table, right?
Right.
So, we're in there. There's a couple of backup bands. We're waiting, and the New York Dolls never show up. And then around 11:30, it's like, okay, we've got a substitute band for you, and here they come. And by this time, there's like maybe 200 people left.
Have stuck around, right?
Yeah, and so I walk up to the stage, and I'm this far away, and out come these four guys, and they've got these wild outfits, and they got these huge platform shoes, and they got this thing that comes down and says "Kiss," and I'm like, who are these guys? And they just blow you away with the classic Kiss kind of intro, and they're all the crazy facial expressions and sticking out the tongue and all this other stuff.
For 200 people.
For 200
Wow.
It was totally nuts. It was totally nuts.
That's super cool.
But while you were at it, I have something for you guys. Thanks for having me.
Dale has left the microphone. He's mobile.
This is what you want when you're interviewing somebody on the radio. You want them to get up and walk away from the microphone.
He's coming back. It's going to be good.
All right, here we go.
All right, sorry to lose it here, but I thought that you guys might enjoy this. Are you familiar with this story right here?
He's handing us issues of Rolling Stone magazine.
Search for the Lost
GNR masterpiece?
Guns N' Roses masterpiece. Have you heard of this story?
No.
It's amazing. It was like that one flop album that they did in 2008.
Oh,
but
yeah.
There's outtakes.
The big comeback album.
Yeah, there's outtakes, and there's at least one or two songs that they say that GNR fans are like, this is the lost masterpiece, blah, blah, blah. It's a pretty cool story, actually.
Okay.
Wow.
Cool. I'll look forward to it. I know Ken's a big Guns N' Roses fan.
My son's middle name is Axel.
That's right.
Right? And I'm not making that up.
No higher tribute than that.
Well, and your son was born like a couple months before we started
That's
our
right.
legal department.
That's right.
In 2002. I think it was 2001 kid.
Yeah, he was 2002 kid, but early 2002, so right around the same time. Mm-hmm. And he has, been on a million picket lines and come to union meetings and watched, Jim Sweeney's very first meeting as a business manager.
Been there with the rat, the whole 9 yards.
The whole thing. He's grown up in the labor movement.
He's a very cool kid who's got a lot more street cred than his friends might realize.
Well, he's like he's got a cool dad.
Thank you.
I thought Ken was his dad.
Oh,
I don't know. He looks nothing like me.
And a tall, skinny mailman.
Not true. Not true. He looks exactly like me, although he'll deny it to the death. Listen,
Dale, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. You've been listening to Dale Pierson, Ken Edwards, Ed Maher. We are here on the Workers' Mic on 720 WGN. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN on Sunday morning. I'm Ed Maher. Sitting beside me here is Ken Edwards. And if you were listening in, we spent a couple segments talking to Dale Pierson, the General Counsel of the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. And I got to thank Dale for spending a little extra time with us. He's great.
Yeah, it was a blast. I like hearing Dale's stories.
Yeah, Dale's as knowledgeable as they come, aggressive, and also just a really cool guy. About the story about Kiss, I thought that was so cool.
I knew that story. Also funny that he would see a band for the 21st time again.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Jimi Hendrix, you've got Led Zeppelin, you've got all these bands that nobody could see, but he's going back for the 21st spin around Grateful Dead, so I must be missing out on something. I'm not a deadhead.
Oof. No, I'd rather watch paint dry, to be blunt with you.
Ouch.
Speaking of paint.
Oh, okay. I like that. That was that's what we call a transition, everybody out there.
Uh-huh.
So one thing we wanted to talk about, something that's going on in Chicago right now, The employees at the Field Museum have started a drive. They've turned in recognition cards, and they're being called the Field Museum Workers United. But they're working to form a union right here in Chicago.
And there's a couple of museums that are doing the same, correct? In the
Right.
Art Institute?
The Art Institute formed a union. The school at the Art Institute formed a union, and then the Newberry Library also.
That's amazing. So it's not like a place that you would normally think would be unionized, right?
Right.
It's a museum.
Right, but I mean, in there you've got your customer service people, your visitor service people, but you've also got research scientists. You have folks who restore artifacts. I mean, there are a lot of different people. So, the working conditions, the working hours for all of those workers they just run the gamut of everything. And so,
so this goes back to the point of that I think we started when we first started the show, which is, look, you may think that working for Google or working for the Art Institute or whatever it is, some white collar professional job is great. You don't need a union because everything's hunky dory.
Right.
Well, it ain't.
No, absolutely not.
It's just not. Right? You could be. What did you say earlier? Like, you talk to a tech person.
Yeah, there was somebody that used to work for Twitter who said, compensation can't always fix the fact that your insurance sucks.
Right.
So,
or that you're going to get laid off without any say in it whatsoever.
Yeah, a union contract isn't just to go from substandard wages to decent wages. It's about protections.
So you would think like these field museum folks would have some pretty good leverage because they're carrying like artifacts that are probably worth like bazillions of dollars. Like, oops.
It would be a shame if something were to happen to those artifacts.
Did that vase from the 14th century break? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Do we have another? We do not have another one.
Oh, that was the only one that existed.
Yeah.
In the world.
What a pity. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, you should give us our contract.
Well, we're not advocating that.
No, God, no, absolutely
just
not.
a joke.
Yes, that is a joke.
A little lighthearted humor here on Sunday morning.
Yeah,
But in the vein of industries that are organizing, I mean, we've talked about this a number of times in the past few weeks. With last week, it was exotic dancers, but this week we saw some news that Microsoft has recognized.
Yeah, the first union. I think it's a gaming company that Microsoft owns, and Microsoft took the position that if these employees wanted to form a union, they would not get in the way.
Right, and that's called neutrality.
It's called neutrality. So I believe, I'm not sure if they either entered into an actual neutrality agreement with the CWA, which is Communication Workers of America, or they just simply stood out of the way. But either way, they didn't bust the union. They didn't put on an anti-union campaign, which includes captive audience meetings, which we'll talk about in a second. Mm-hmm. But they simply said, hey, our employees want a union.
Right.
More power to them. We will sit down with them. We'll negotiate with them in good faith. And we welcome the CWA. And you know that these folks, much like what 1220 did of the IBW with the intelligentsia, they're going to get a contract pretty quickly. Right. And I bet it's going to be good. And that will help the rest of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
What they're doing is important. So kudos to Bill Gates and who else? Who's the Microsoft people?
I don't know.
And it's like Bill Gates and some other guy, whatever. But what
congratulations to the other guy also.
Yeah. What Bill Gates said was, I'm going to shave a foot off my yacht, and I'm going to give you guys a contract. One foot off his yacht.
Let's hear it.
Yeah. That's for Bill Gates.
A thundering round of applause.
So we talked about, as we're talking about this union busting, right? One of the things that we are going to be focusing on is what's called captive audience meetings. So stay tuned for some discussion about that over the next couple of weeks, because a captive audience meeting, for those of you that don't know, what happens is the employer that is trying to bust a union will bring in a union buster or lawyers, et cetera, and they will force you to sit in their lunchroom on work time, because they're paying you, to listen to them tell you why you don't need a union. And when I say employers, I'm talking about Progressive, this no evil food company. If you look them up and look what happened there, Google it. It's absolutely abhorrent. So they'll force you to sit there and listen to them tell you why you shouldn't join the union.
Right.
I firmly
it's
believe
an unfair advantage, really.
Oh my God, does it ever?
The union doesn't have an opportunity to do something.
Right, because the union guys are standing outside of the gate, go like, hey, everybody, let's meet. Afterwards, they have you 8 hours a day, and they're just pounding you with nonstop anti-union rhetoric, literature, sometimes flat out lies, BS. And I think that the employees themselves have a First Amendment right not to listen to it. I think they have a First Amendment right not to say, I don't want to hear it, because if union speech is political speech, which is what some of the case law has said now, then how come employer speech about unions is not political speech as well? You can't force me to listen to that. The NLRB right now, the National Labor Relations Board, is looking at that, right?
Yeah, they're the general counsel. Her name is Jennifer Abruzzo, but she's come in and she's taken a look at a lot of things that have gone against workers over the last several years and looking to change them. So the captive audience meeting might be one of the first things on the chopping block, and I think that's welcome news to everybody who's trying to form a union, who has been through it, and who supports these workers. So looking forward to reporting more on that.
And by the way, listen to what it's called. It's called captive audience meetings. Like
captives,
right?
like prisoners,
like they
can't leave.
They shut the door behind you. Now you can't leave. Remember that?
Yeah, it's a Bronx Tale.
Oh yeah, great movie. One. Really good movie. Nothing to do with labor, by the way, but just
watch it anyway.
Yeah, watch it anyway. That's our movie pick of the week.
Movie pick of the week: A Bronx Tale.
Now you
Cologino. It's a kid's name. See, Cologino.
Now you can't leave.
Yeah.
Listen, I just want to thank Dale today. Thanks, everybody. You have been listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. We'll see you next week.
Take care, everybody.